Let's start out, since we've got two of you, let's start out first. Where were you born? Born and raised?
I was born in Hardwick, Minnesota, which is 9 miles north of Loren. And I was raised by that little town. I mean, they raised me. I mean, I was very, very fortunate to be born in a little town like that, because it was perfect. Yeah.
Jeanne, where were you born?
I was born in California, San Jose actually, and grew up in Saratoga, which at that time was a town of 300 or 400, really small. Now it's just boomed. But yeah, I grew up there until I was 18. I lived there.
What was your life like growing up in California?
What was it like?
Yeah.
Oh, it was fun. We lived in a small town. We lived out of town on a little, I guess you'd call it an acreage now. And we just had a good time. When we were really little, we were at home all the time, and there was a creek that ran through our property, and so we learned to swim in the creek, and you know, as we grew, there was a little park in the town, and so as high school kids would gather there in the evening, especially in the summertime, and you know, sing songs and tell jokes and whatever. It was just really pleasant, yeah.
So you said you moved till you were 18. Then tell me about what happened after that.
Oh, well, when I was 18, then I got on I was accepted into the nursing school in Rochester. So I got on the train and came to Rochester, Minnesota, and spent the next 3 years there. I went home twice, I think, in that time. So at that time we went to school year-round. There wasn't a summer break or anything like that. So we had 3 weeks off during the year. And
What year would that have been, Jeanne?
1945.
1945. So let's start back. Bring us to 1945 for you.
Oh, in 1945, I was in the service. I went in as soon as I got out of high school, and I went into the Navy and seen the world. Which might just, but excuse me, was in the South Pacific, and I ended up, I was in the Sea Beast, but I ended up with ComNav 14ND. So that's what happened to me.
Tell us a little bit about your military service.
Well, I started out and I was on an aircraft carrier, the old Saratoga, and it was very old. And we got into a typhoon, and it actually tore the gun tub on the starboard side off. And so they decided that they were gonna, you know, retire it. And they did make it into a troop carrier for a while. I've got pictures on the Honolulu paper where they doing this. And then I went to work for ComNav, which was in Pearl Harbor, and that was 14ND Admiral Whitehead. And I kind of drove officers around and picked them up at Fleet Landing and took them to wherever they wanted to go until I got discharged.
So then how did you two meet? Was it the Saratoga connection? That's kind of ironic.
No, that's quite a story behind that too. I'll let Jeanne tell you.
Well, one of my classmates, during training we could go to, they called it rural nursing, so it was out in the boonies. So one of my classmates had come to Worthington on her rural nursing and met a man that, and they were deeply in love. So anyway, but she was in Rochester and he was in Worthington. So he'd come over on the weekends and see her. But at that time, that was a long drive because of old Highway 16, 2 lanes. So he conned Loren into coming over one weekend. He said there was a gal over there that he wanted him to meet, whatever. So they were supposed to be there Friday night. We were supposed to go out for supper, I think, or something. But they didn't get there till 9 o'clock or after. And we lived in a nursing, a house that was for students, nursing. So our curfew was 10:30. So that didn't go over so big. But the next day then we had some good times. And that's how we met. And I'd come down here, I'd come to Worthington every once in a while if I could get a ride with somebody, or on the bus, and we'd date. But it was, and then he went back into the service in 1950. I was working at that time, but he went back into the service then. And I was working in Rochester at that time. I'd finished, graduated and passed my boards and was employed at the hospital in Rochester.
So when did you decide to make it official? When did you get married?
Well, I corresponded with her, when I was in. And I thought, she was very easy to get along with, and she was a snappy dresser and everything. And I came home on a 7-day leave, and I called her on the phone from my mother's, and I said, let's get married. Big silence. And then pretty soon she said, well, you better come over here and talk to me. I said, oh, okay. So I went over there and we lined, I didn't even know you had to go through all this stuff. But anyway, we went and got a license and had a blood test and all that kind of nonsense. In fact, we went to get our license in a town in Iowa, and I had to have a witness. Well, it was just the two of us, So there was a guy sweeping out in a quarter out there, and I said, hey, I'll give you $10. You come here to be a witness. Well, got the license. So she wanted to get married in a little brown church in the Vale, okay? So we went over there.
Well, we had to come home.
Oh, your dress.
Well, we had to come back to Worthington because he didn't have his uniform. Well, I tell you. So we came back to Worthington and got his uniform. In the meantime, this gets so complicated. I was visiting we went down to visit my classmate who lived in Waterloo. And she's the one that said, oh, you better get married here, and got us lined up for blood club, blah, blah, blah. So I went and shopping and bought a suit, and I don't know, I had a hat, and then we wore hats and high heel shoes and gloves, and I had that all somewhere, must have been with me. Anyway, so we came back here. We were going to be married on Saturday, and there was a big snowstorm. And there was already, it was like this winter. Lots and lots of snow on the ground, and here was this big snowstorm. We couldn't go anyplace. So I called Jerry, And she, she says it's not snowing here. Well, that didn't work. So then when we went back to Nisswa to be married, had to be on Monday, and people that were gonna come and join us, like Loren's folks, that's a working day. And you didn't take days off in those days to go to a wedding. So we ended up with the best man and bridesmaid and another couple that drove down to Nisswa from here to our wedding. And when we got to the little brown church, this is in 1952. We got to the church and there was a room off of somewhere in the church. This little old lady took me in there with a basin of water and said, well, you can freshen up here and change your clothes and then we'll go into the church, which I did. In the meantime, nobody showed up. Dooney and Helen weren't there yet, and we were supposed to be getting married, and nobody was there to witness. So Loren was about ready to go into St. Charles and see if he could find somebody to come. Oh dear, I tell you. Well, they finally arrived and things worked out and we got ourselves married. But that was so funny. A bowl of, like those old porcelain wash bowls. And she came in and poured some warm water and there was a towel and a washcloth and some soap. You can freshen up here.
So what day was that? And it was in 1952?
That was in 52.
Okay. What day of it was winter. What day were you married?
In March.
March. Oh, so a March snowstorm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those can be pretty wicked.
Yeah.
Then we had the wedding dance in Charles City in the VFW club.
Wedding dance.
Yeah.
Dinner.
And
We went
just
to dinner and
6 of us.
Okay. I'm from Iowa, so I'm familiar with the area
Okay.
that you're
Okay.
talking about. So tell us about, so it's 1952, what happens then?
Oh. You really want to know?
I do.
Well, we did get married, and she joined me finally in Fort Knox. I was going to school there, and we didn't have any kind of a vehicle. And she said, well, she had she found this Chevy coupe, and it was in really good shape, didn't have much mileage, and all up and on about it, and color was black. And I said, well, have you got the friend, a man to look at it? She said, well, yeah, this one guy did. And he said it was fine. So we bought that, and she was not that much experienced in driving. She had a driver's license, but bought the thing, and then she went to Mundelein, Illinois,
Yeah.
where she had a cousin, and then came all the way down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, Fort Knox. And I just sweat blood all that time. And her sense of direction is nothing. And I thought, oh, she's going to get lost. But she made it. I was in class, and the guy came up and he said, hey, Sarge, there's a gal out here at the gate, wants to see you. And I went out there, and she had put this wedding dress that she had, kind of a suit, and a red and white candy hat on, and matching gloves, and high heel shoes. And of course, these guys at the gate were going nuts, with this gal. Anyway, I went out there, and we did rent a place in little town near there and set up shop and went to the PX and bought all the plates and stuff we had to have with some groceries and started a married life.
So when you came, take us to the time when you came to Worthington and made your life here.
Oh, I came here in 1943.
Well,
40, yeah, a little late. But anyway, the first job I had was a lifeguard at Chautauqua Beach. They needed one and I needed a job and they hired me and so I and two other, Irene Riss and I can't remember the other gal's name.
Janice Seether.
Oh, Janice Seethler. We talked, the three of us, and Janice Seethler was a beautiful woman, and I fell in love with her right away. But anyway, that move to Worthington, I had been through many schools in Nebraska and Kansas and whatever, and Worthington accepted me. I got into what you might call a clique in high school, and when I went out for football, and I didn't know nothing about football. I had been into wrestling down in Burlington, Iowa, and that's where we came from, and they didn't have wrestling here, and I was just sick. So to meet the guys, second cousin of mine says, you know, go out for football and you meet the guys and all this, and so I did. And that was Osterberg's first year here, and we were coming in from scrimmage at one night, and I said, you know, I really don't know nothing about football. And he says, yeah, I know. He says, I'll teach you. I was okay. And no, I loved Worthington. I've always considered it my home, and I've left it many times, but always come back.
So did you decide you wanted to have your family and raise your family here? How did that come to be?
Well, Jeanne got tuberculosis again, and she was in the sanatorium for 11 months. And that's why the reason I kind of got out of the military, because the military life is not good for that situation. In fact, as I didn't know whether she was even going to live. That time they put him on just bed rest. But they came up with a new drug, streptomycin, and this Dr. Claggett did a lobectomy on her, and I had to give her a shot with that streptomycin, I think every day, and it worked. She never got it back. And there was a contractor in town here by the name of Art Payne, and when she got out of the sand, then her and I came to Worthington, and that's how I got back in Worthington. And we did raise our two kids here. They went to school here and whatever. Yeah.
Tell us, so that was in the 50s, mid to late 50s, I'm guessing?
50s and 60s.
50s
Yeah.
and 60s. Tell us about life in Worthington at that time for you as a young married couple with young children.
It was great because it was a small enough town. The kids could, well, when they were really little, of course, they didn't go, but as they grew older in high school, or even late grade school, you know, they could ride their bikes or go wherever they wanted. You didn't worry about them. They were home by 6 o'clock, that was fine. So it was really nice. So they went to school here through high school, and it was enjoyable. We were involved in the church, and kids went to church camp, and it was just really a really nice small town life, quiet and safe. you always felt safe. Nobody locked their doors in their house, you know. Nobody locked their car doors. Just
Did you continue your nursing?
I nursed, yeah, here I worked. I worked at the hospital, then I worked at the clinic for a lot of years when it was downtown. And then I went back to the hospital and I was OR supervisor, operating room supervisor for about 20 years before I retired. So.
And Loren, you were in construction, is that correct? Or?
Yep.
Okay, and what are some of the highlights of your career in construction?
Well,
Things around town or anything?
my dad was in the dirt business. And there were two things I wanted to do, either be a pilot or, move dirt. Well, I did get my pilot license and whatever, but it was just too expensive, and I thought, I really like moving dirt. And I got into that, and I stayed in it all my life. And I worked for different contractors all over, and I just enjoyed it. My only claim to fame is that, because I was right up there with the best of them.
Can you tell me about some of the buildings or projects you were involved in?
Oh
in
my
Worthington?
gosh, there was airports and interstate and roads and ponds and
Streets, local streets in town.
yeah.
Owen Hills and-
many of the new additions.
Oh, sure.
They had. Oh yeah, no, I worked till I was 85. Really?
Good for you.
Yeah, my brother and I were in business for a while, and we did a lot of dirt business around here. In the 70s, we went broke. And when we were selling the equipment, Tom Murphy was there, and he bought some of the lowboy and sheep's foot and some other stuff. And I had two blades, or Bob and I did. And he says, I'll buy one of those blades if you come with it. I said, great, I'll have a job. So I went to work for him. And then eventually he passed away, and then his wife took over. And then I went to work for her and stayed with her until I quit.
So I know that since you've retired, I know, Loren, you are into woodworking. Talk to us a little bit about that.
The woodwork, when I quit work, I didn't know what I was going to do. And of course, I told you about the saw. And I thought, I'm going to make a model of every piece of machinery that I operated, and every vehicle and tank or whatever that I was involved in the Army. And right now I'm working on a C-119, which is they call it a flying boxcar, and that is one of the planes that we jumped out of when I was in a paratroop. They had the C-47s and then these 119s, and the 47s you got an awful lot of prop blast, but not the 19s. So I decided to make which I'm working on right now, and that's going to be mine. The rest of them I gave away to my grandkids one Christmas.
And kids.
And Jerry and Tessine. I gave them a picture of this envelope, and so I don't have any of that stuff. I give it all away.
So you're going to keep that
have
for
it.
yourself.
Yep.
That's when you're working on
Yep.
that. So,
And then through the years I've done some work for the church, and other people have brought me. One of them had an antique high chair which went down and made a rocking chair. And there was some pieces missing and whatever, and they wanted to know if I could fix them. I said, sure. And so I did. And I said, before I glue this thing all back together, I said, I want you to look at it. And they looked at it, and I think it was his when he was a kid.
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, no, that's just perfect. So that I was kind of proud of that thing.
So,
But then, yeah, I did a lot of other work for other people too. And I'm still doing it.
that's great.
Yep.
Jeannie, what do you do since you've been retired? What do you like to do?
Well, I volunteered a lot. Excuse me. The hospital auxiliary, and I worked several hours a month down there, and at the nursing home, I used to go out to South Shore and do manicures for the ladies, and worked at hospice. Did manicures out there and just visited whatever, and a lot of volunteer work. And then I was making quilts. I made quilts for the grandchildren by that time. I guess Christine and Jerry have one too, but I made quilts for the grandchildren when they were married. And I've just done quite a bit of that kind of thing, so I've been busy.
So tell me, you both had nice, long lives. What do you think the secret to that is? Is it staying busy?
People have asked me, in fact, I just got out of the hospital. And there was a gal there, just got engaged. And they were talking, they said, well, how many years were you and Jeannie married? I said, well, I think how many years has it been now?
71.
71 years. Well, she said, well, what's the secret? I said, it's no secret. I said, it's very simple. She said, well, what is it? I said, it's LOVE. I said, that is the glue that holds country together, family together, our congregation together. I said, you know, if you got that, you got her made.
That's very true.
It is very true.
Is there any other advice you'd give to people that are, you know, getting married or going into, you know, living in the world that we live in today? Because it's very different, obviously, than when you were coming up and when you were married and even when you were raising your children. Is there anything, sage advice that you have?
I don't think so. I think, you know, you you need to be kind and courteous and respectful of your mate. And if you have those things, I mean, that, of course, that's incorporated into love, but those are the kind of things that really matter.
So in this time you've had here on Earth, what's the biggest surprise that in life or in society or something that's happened that is surprising? Anything that surprised you along the way?
Yeah. When Jeannie got out of the SAM, the doctor said, you know, I don't want you two to start a family until I say so. Okay? So we did. And then one day we was over and she was getting the exam and he said, well, you know, I think you two can, you know, have a family if you want. Oh, great. Didn't pay any more attention to it than that. And all of a sudden one day Jeannie said to me, she said, I'm pregnant. Oh, really? And we had Christine. Well, that was just great, and she was just, you know, perfect. Well, then we were going somewhere that one night. We were driving. We lived in Cherry Point, and I remember going down and just going around the corner again, and she said, "I'm pregnant." I almost drove in the ditch. So anyway, and then we had Jerry, and that was, we had a girl and a boy, and we thought, that's it. No, and those are the biggest surprises I ever had, and I've loved every minute of it.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about life here in Worthington or your life together?
I don't know. Just live one day at a time. We've been fortunate to have the family that we have that are so good to us and so keep us going, keep us in our home. At 95 to be in your own home is pretty special, and we couldn't do it without them. But
Worthington, I told you that before, that this was a city that accepted me. And I have watched it, and actually, like many divisions and housing divisions we did and whatever. And, the city itself has always been, to me, very loving. And it's changed drastically from what it is from years ago. But then you look at it, and I see people walking by my house around the lake, and you have Asians, and you have black people, and all different nationalities. And downtown is now changed from but I just love it. Now, what city do you know of that has done this? And the downtown would be deserted practically if you didn't have those people setting up businesses and doing. I just love this city.
That was just part one with Jeanne and Loren Goettsch. They've lived in Worthington a long time and have a lot of experiences. So we caught up with them again at their home in Loren's workshop and heard a little bit more about their story.
When returning to Worthington, when you got out of the service, and tell me about working on the current location where the high school football field is now.
Oh yeah, the old field was kind of on the, was old, so they wanted to put a new one. So we put a new one in the area where it's at right now. Was I and Jay Castor and Stubardinius. I look at the football field they got now and the one that we built. Of course, we built it the specs, what the engineer wanted. But it lasted for many years. And I also put the track in too, and I worked on redoing it. Don Bashie was the coach in the track, and he wanted us guys to do it, so we rebuilt that track for him, and I got a diploma from him on doing that. Yeah, it was a nice job. Took a while to do it, but we did it.
So then I know that's one of many projects you do, but another one I have highlighted here is, did you do the St. Matthew's Church basement with your dad? Talk about that.
Well, it's a pretty good sized basement. There's a lot of dirt there to move. And most times you see basements now and they tend to dig them by backhoes. But we didn't have those backhoes then. And my dad run the dozer and I run the scraper. And we hauled the dirt out and he, shaped the walls as we went down. And it was Hudson brother building the church. And then through the years, I worked many projects with them. And there was some, Brewster School was another one. And that really helped for them. So now, it was kind of neat because then the church kind of expanded as it kept going. And of course, another one to the church first, and was a little square wooden building on 7th Avenue. And so when they built this new one, I kind of got involved in it. So that was nice. I enjoyed it.
Full circle then.
Yeah.
So then, let's see, we talked about, I think we talked about the Army the last time you returned. Talk about, you did some work on Interstate 80, it looks like. What was that like when the interstates were coming in?
Yeah, well, and I wanted to do this. And the contractor here in Worthington, his name was Art Payne, he died. And it was about in the middle of the season. But I had worked for this outfit for years before, and my dad did too. And they were from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was a Lowell Construction Company. So I called them up and I said, hey, I need a job, and I told them what happened. And superintendent I had way back when, his name was Homer, and he had bought into the company. And he says, yeah, he says, be down to Casey, Iowa, Monday morning. But it's like Friday, and so Jeanne had to pack things up, and Christine was just a little tight, and went down there. And of course, Casey was a very small town, and we didn't have any place to sleep. But my brother was working down there, and he had a little house. So he had a mattress, and at night, we'd take the mattress out behind the couch and put it on the living room floor, and that's where we slept until he finally got on us to rent there. Yeah, then Interstate 80 became one of the biggest truck routes through the center of the United States. Very, very busy.
Isn't that something to think that there wasn't an interstate at one time?
Pardon?
Isn't it something to think that there wasn't an interstate
No,
at one time? And you were in on putting that in. That's something to say.
Well, one of the things that was interesting on that thing, there was a cemetery right there, and we were building it right, next to it, and there was about a 30-foot cut. And so if you put it on a 3-to-1, which we usually do for, couldn't do it. It was pretty, as we kept cutting down, we kept cutting the slope, so it went with us, because you couldn't get a dozer up there, you couldn't get a blade up there when it was done. And I thought, well, I guess the cemetery has got more whatever than the farmers do. And yeah, it's almost like going cross country, because you just got a forest of stakes when you start out, and figuring out where the interchanges are, and it's complicated.
That was a huge job. Is that the biggest job you ever did, would you say? Or what is the biggest job you ever did?
I suppose another job that we had was the Worthington Airport. My dad and I worked on that one, and that's a pretty good project too, for around Worthington. I really enjoyed that job. We had a little problem with the union, but we got her done.
So when you're, were you involved in Oxford? And now that they're redoing Oxford Street again.
Oh yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, that was just a gravel road at one time. And there was a farm way over on the east side. I can't think of his name right now. and he raised cattle. He was a good friend of mine. And of course, he sold a lot of property to them. And where our quick stop is now, that was part of his property also. And so they put this highway through there. Well, through the years then, they improved it. And right now they're coring it out and putting a new base in and putting new concrete in. And we did in the other direction from Hummelson, going east, we did that quite a few years ago. The same thing, same type of pouring out and backfilling and whatever. Another interesting job that we had, and that was before I went in the service, my dad and I did day drive-in theater. And that was, it's a short slope and a long slope. And of course there was nothing there, and they'd haul in this dirt, and my dad had a expertise at pull blade. When this was the motor mount, I had to pull him, as we made, and besides that it was on a curve. He was a fantastic operator, and I learned a lot from him. I started out with him when I was just a little guy, and he had a outfit over by Harvard, Minnesota, but then when the war started, he went on to building air bases and all that kind of stuff. And some of those I worked on also. Lincoln, Nebraska, Hebron, Nebraska, Cherryville, Kansas, Coffeyville, Kansas. There was one in Missouri, one in Oklahoma. So yeah, I worked on a lot of different deals.
Kind of went where the work was, right? Pardon? You went where the work was, traveled around, yeah.
Yeah, we were like gypsies. They would say, well, okay, you have prejudice, black and white. Well, I experienced that. I wasn't black, but we were a bunch of dirt stiffs. And yeah, it was hard to get an apartment. And when I was in school, I never made any friends. I don't know why. Until I came to Worthington. Yeah, it was a lifesaver. And we were down on Worthington Highway then. And then we moved up here. And that was in 1943.
When you drive around Worthington, you see all these places that you've worked on. What do you think?
Well, I didn't think too much of it until my son got on me one day. We were down in the basement, and he seen some of those things. He says, you should put a list down of all the things you did. And so I did. And started out way back in, before I went into service, on a gay drive-in theater. After the service, I did the football field, and then the Hagee edition, and the Roos edition, and the Johnson Homewood Hills edition, Orville Apples edition, Eckerson's edition, part of that street around the lake, and of course the college and college football track. Yeah, I didn't realize how involved I was in Worthington and in its expansion. It kind of amazed me, really.
Well, that's only half of it. It says the racetrack at the fairgrounds.
Right, did that too. And did it 2 times. Then went to short track. It was a longer one. Well, they wanted, they just kind of wanted to put in. Okay, well, they decided they wanted it the same as the Jackson racetrack because they did a lot of racing over there. So I went over there and got a bunch of figures when I had surveyed it, brought it back and built it. And I don't know, but I think they've been kind of redoing a lot of it now again. Yeah, I worked on that 2-3 times.
Yeah, so you built them, redid them, and now they're sometimes being redone again.
Yeah, it was a longer track first, but then they shortened it up. We wanted different kind of elevations on the corners. And yeah.
So tell me about the work you do, because you're talking what seems to be French to me about. Tell me what you have to be good at when you do the kind of work that you do.
Well, there's some guys that move dirt, and that's all they do. And I say, so some guy, he's got it in his veins. He knows what he's doing. And he only moves the dirt once. You don't move it twice, you move it just once, and then that's got to be on grade. And I always wanted to be as good as my dad. Because a blade man, if you're a finished blade man, you can get a job anywhere. I mean, I never had a problem. The fact is, when Bob and I sold our outfit out, Tom Murphy bought some other property. And Tom says, well, you got a couple blades there. He says, I'll buy one if you come with it. I go, great. Well, I don't have a job anyway. And I don't know how many years I worked for him. And then he passed away, and then I worked for Suzanne. And no, they were two wonderful people to work for. But getting back to what they do, like if I was putting something to grade, football field or whatever, they run it on a 2% grade or a 3% grade or whatever. And when they put blue tops every, say, 20 feet, and that'll be a roll down. And so when you put that in, you cut to the top of those blue tops. And that creates a blade. Now they do it by GPS, which is nothing, they're not really dirt stiff, they just move it. So, yeah, and if you got the talent for that, and I had worked with Steve Slocum was another one. He was an awesome dozer man. Bud John, he was another awesome dozer man. And Ryan Rutson was another one, and he knows dirt too. And then Steve Boss was one, he worked with me. And yeah, those guys know what they're doing.
Their skill.
Their skill. And then, yeah, it's nothing. It's hard to teach somebody like that. It's a natural talent, I think. And they enjoy their job and do it, yeah.
So how did you take that and translate it into, let's talk about what's behind us here, of all your woodworking skill. How did you translate into that, and how did you get started in it?
Okay, well, I never did much woodwork. Well, I quit moving dirt, and I was 85 years old, and I really didn't have anything to do. Jeanne was doing a lot of quilting and stuff. And I was up north with Don Johnson, and he says, we got an auction in town today, you want to go with it? And I said, well, no, I don't really need anything. Well, he says they got a table saw there, because I was looking for one. So I went up there and I bought this table saw for $200, and it was one that was used like in industrial, in high school, where they teach woodworking. And it was not too bad a shape, it was kind of rusty and whatever. I took it home, cleaned it up, painted it, took the motor off, took it off the lower, and they went through it. And I used that thing up until like 2 years ago. And, it was nothing fancy, but it did what I wanted to do. And then I learned as I worked. And I decided at one time, okay, what are you going to build? Well, I started building a model of every piece of equipment I operated. and trucks and jeeps or whatever that I ran in the service. And here I am, and I'm still doing it.
So tell me what you've got back here. These are all things that you've operated when you were in the service.
The airplane, there were two things I wanted to do, move dirt or fly. And I learned how to fly out in the old airport. I worked for Cy Helmutson, he was a manager. And worked with a guy by the name of McCormick. He used to refabricate planes. I worked there, and most of the money I made, I got flying lessons. And Howard 70 was one, and Art Grain, and there was another guy, Sprouse Johnson. And between the three of them, I got started on it, and I really enjoyed it and got my license. But it got really too expensive. I just couldn't afford it. But I did learn, so I made that one airplane for Roger, and that kind of. But now I'm making another one now. That's the C-119. That's a flying box star, and that's one that I used to jump out when I was in a parachute. And I like that one. The C-47 was fine, but it was a bigger part blast than this 119. So I just kind of went, that's how I did it. I just, things that I related to in my life.
You keep working on it. What does it do for you? Does it relax you, or?
I can come out here, usually in the morning. I did used to go to Hawaii in the morning, but then I'd come back and have breakfast, and I'd come out here, and I'm Jeanne. All of a sudden it's dinner time. Well, I'd go in, eat dinner, take a nap, and I'd come out in the afternoon, and oh, wow, it's 5 o'clock, beer time. I mean, it just went, it was, and then there was a lot of people that had different things that they wanted me to fix, including the church. There's one on the wall back here, there was a high chair that I built for a couple, I think they were teachers, that he had this thing when he was a little boy. And it was a rocking chair, and then it comes up and it's a high chair. And I'd never seen one before. And that was an antique, and he said, some pieces missing or whatever. And I said, can you fix it? And I said, yeah. And I did, and I fixed it and put it together. I said, well, come and look at it. If you think that's what you want. He came and looked, and he said, oh yeah, that's just the way it was when I was a kid. So I glued it up and got it done for him. It was fun. I enjoyed that. And I know people have brought me other things too, and these are the antique type stuff that got kind of beat up. I mean,
There's a lot of problem solving in what you do.
oh yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
I come to the conclusion, on the woodwork, if there's one thing you want to do, is you want control. And that means I get these holes, I'm doing it. You can do it by hand, but you're going to have a drift one way or other. I do it in the drill press because I got it control. I get that where, the angle I want or where I want it, and when it's done, I've got control of it. And that's the same way with, the pieces I made. I make jigs to hold the pieces. You don't just glue them together. You make jigs to hold them in place in the exact position you want. And that was a trick I learned when I made that 1938 Caterpillar tractor. Doing the treads and whatever on that thing. Yeah, I really had to make a lot of jigs to make that. And the same way with that tank. All that, you control. You got to have control. You can't just guess at it or think you can do it by hand, because no, you got to have control, 100%. Otherwise, it ain't gonna fit. Okay, a pull blade was a blade that was pulled behind the cap, which I ran, and it was all handwork with no gears or anything. You have to have these big wheels that operate your moldboard, and you also got wheels that you can tilt your wheels one way or another. So you did have some control from the tongue with that wheel. But it's still, he had to have an eye for dirt, what he was doing. It's kind of hard to explain. I mean, we didn't have any really fancy stakes and whatever in those days. Most of that was done by eye. I mean, the stakes were there, and you get the rough shape in, but then doing the final product, that took a lot of. He had an eye for dirt, but somebody told me one day, says, you're a better operator than your dad. I said, no. I said, I'm operating now in a big motor grader, and I operate all these little levers, and they control everything, and I don't really have to really work at it. And he had to do this same type of work that I did with that type of equipment. And that was, they used to have what they call a mucker, and that's when he had this outfit over in Hardwick, where it had a big moldboard in it, and it kind of plowed the dirt up onto a belt and excavated up into the middle of the road. Well, they would start, they would cut up and on down into where the bottom of the ditch was. Then you had a bank, you had to cut that as you went down. And then as you just kept going in a circle all day long. Like, probably do a mile at a time. Well, when you got done, you had all this dirt piled up in the middle. So then you had to get on top of that and blade the surface of the top of the road plus your ditches. And then no stakes. I mean, he had to do that by eye. So, he had me beat 10 ways to Sunday. And most people don't think about that, but no, and I had, people compliment me on different jobs that I do, and I really appreciate it. But he had me beat 10 ways to Sunday.
It's a lot of changes.
Oh, yes.
I mean, from where your father started and where they're at now.
Yep, it is. I actually, right after the service, I worked for this guy up here for a while, and then this one in Iowa called me, and I went down to Iowa and was working on the Central Highway into on the campus there. But those scrapers, they were rubber-tired ones, and they were the first ones made, and they were made by Wheeler, and they were like a farm tractor with steel wheels, you might say. But they were, you had a steering wheel, you had all levers, and you had the little wheels in the front, and they were hard to steer, especially with your loose dirt, and then you had a big one right behind you, and then you had a scraper behind you that. And that was one of the first scrapers that was made, and I just enjoyed running it. And then I was doing this, and all of a sudden, with his homework, he said, I want you to run the push gap. I said, well, there's not much fun in the push gap. Well, he said, what I want you to do, when you push them, you know, be your cutting grade and you got an eye for grade. I said, you know, tell them to lift or lower their scraper or whatever. And so that's what I did. And I broke a lot of young men, especially some from the service. They were starting out and wanted a job. I had one job down in Iowa that we were working on that. And they had this guy, he was just out of the service, and his brother was getting out pretty soon. And he wondered if he could get a job. And I said, well, I think he can. And he did, and he came to work for us. And so the two brothers were working with me, moving dirt. And we had a borrow pit right next to this highway we were building. And it was, it had rained, but then it kind of got so we could go, so started out, and his guy's brother went up there, and the guy had the sheep's foot, had a rock cut in it. So he got out and went there and was helping him try to pry that rock out of their sheep foot. Well, his brother came up behind him and thought he was stuck and pushed him and crushed him between and I watched this, you know, from where I was on one of the barrel pit. And of course, he couldn't hobble or anything, and that was not good. That really stuck with me for a while.
How about all the farm work?
Putting in terraces, putting in ponds.
Oh yeah, I did miles and miles of terraces when they first came out, and of course the conservation wanted them done. They tell you know how you did what, and it was almost up to you to figure out how to move it, how you want to do it. So it took me a little while, but I got it with a blade. I thought, oh, I can do this with a blade. I don't need nothing else. And I did. I don't know how many terraces I put in. And then they also had farm ponds. And some of them were just hole in the ground, but then there were a lot of them that were dams. And I don't know, there's a lot of them in Nobles County, and there's some up around Graham Lakes and there we put in. But even to this day, all them dams are still holding. So we got water in them. So Bob and I did a good job. No, yeah, we did a lot of work for. I would say that almost 75% of our jobs was with farmers, and you know, driveways and ditches and terraces and ponds and taking out old tree shelters that they had. Did a lot of work for Jack Booty too, on some of his farms. And yeah, I would say at least 75% of work the jobs with farmers, and I became, you know, friends with a lot of farmers. And the interesting thing about that is, well, now they come in and they say, well, man, yeah, you worked for me. Remember, you did my driveway. Yeah, I probably did. Who knows how many? You know, you put in my terraces. Oh, yeah. But I say, sure, well, finally, some of them I can finally remember, you know, oh, yeah, I remember you, oh, yeah. So, but I enjoyed working for farmers. And we did a lot of site work for these new tin buildings that they finally started in mills. So Bob and I did the site work for them.
You definitely left your mark. You've left your mark.
I left my mark, and yeah, Worthington, I just love this city, and they were so good to me, and the farmers around here. I'll tell you a story. We got burnt out. I mean, we were really burnt out. So all the work we had done, we lost it. So we had to rebuild all the machinery that got burnt and whatever, and we didn't have a lot of money in. couldn't borrow any money from the bank or that because what kind of jobs you got or what, well, you don't have them, Anyway, we started out and the church helped us and other people helped us, but there's one guy by the name of Doc Martin Oil. And he kind of hauled diesel fuel for us. And we were sitting at Crippy Station there one day, and it was a kind of warm day where we was having a bottle of pop, and he said, well, how you boys doing? I said, well, we're in that tin shed next door. In the back of it, I rented it for overhauling machinery, but it's kind of slow work, and he said, well, how you doing financially or something, how you wake you up? And I said, well, yesterday. That's kind of a tough deal. I said, we don't have anything under contract and whatever. He said, well, I'll tell you what you do. You go down to the bank and he said, what would it take you to get back in the field? I said, I don't know, $10,000. Well, I said, you go down to the bank and tell Mr. Leonard to loan it to you. And now co-signed.
And that's all it took then.
Yep. Oh, that kind of breaks me up, but he didn't have to do that. So, yeah, we got burned out twice, really. We had another fire after that. But that time we were in a little better shape. But every time that happens, you lose years ahead that you build it up, and then you got to start all over again. Of course, Jeanne and Dell, stuck brothers. But it's hard. It really was hard. And let's talk about something else.
Okay. Well, let's talk about what do you learn when you have to go through something like that? Because we all do, in some way, shape, or form. What did you learn? What did you learn about humanity or learn about life when you're down and have to pull yourself up?
I think through my wife, who got me involved in the church again, that I did a lot of praying. I don't know, things just kind of turned out. It was not easy. And of course, the old Jeanne had a job, so that kind of helped me out. But it was, when you lose that, it's hard. And just like losing somebody in the family, that's hard. Well, who do you turn to? And I guess that's what I did. I decided that I would follow Jeanne, period.
And it worked out.
But that's worked out. No, really. Jeanne and I have been through a lot of hills. We've climbed a lot of hills. And in fact, we're climbing one right now. But, yeah, you go. Yeah, it's tough, but just do it. And of course, we got kids helping, and thank God. And she raised them right.
Family's everything.
Oh, yeah. Really is, too. Truly, yep. No. I look back and you have a lot of, I never got really rich. I never made a lot of money. But I got a fabulous family.
So you're rich.
I'm rich. I and Jeanne are rich.
You had it all highlighted for me. In 1953, you came to Worthington and you lived on Cherry Point, across from
Loren's parents?
Right.
Okay, talk about that. What was that like when you came? Because you were born and raised in California, right? We talked about that earlier. Talk about that time in your life.
Oh, well, here I was, all alone. The only person I knew was Loren. But his family accepted me and took me in as part of their family, and they were wonderful. I had wonderful in-laws. And the kids, his brother and sister, treated me like family too. So it was really wonderful.
Right? Because you were far away from your family.
Well, yes, yeah, they were still in California.
So then in 1954, it says here that you started working at the hospital?
I think so.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, at that time you were a nurse, you had patients to care for, and you did your work, and it was wonderful. You really were hands-on taking care of the patients, and you did everything. Changed bedpans and washed bedpans and gave baths, and I mean, way different than it is now. And handwritten charts and etc. And I did that for quite a while. Well, it's before then we left.
Interesting thing she talks about, being a nurse. In those days, the nurse wore a uniform, and they had a little white hat on top of their head, and starched skirts, I think, or dresses, or whatever, uniform, and white socks and white shoes. And she also had her pin, and usually a handkerchief up here too. And they were very proud of this uniform they had. Well, I just got out of the hospital, and I can't tell the difference between doctors and nurses and aides or whatever, because they all dress the same. I mean, it's a whole different ballgame. When she was in nursing, they were very proud of that uniform.
So did you work an evening shift, or
Well,
how did that all work? How did you make that work?
Well, at first I worked days, but then, when I decided that I was able to work again, I had been recovering from tuberculosis, and so when it was time for me to work again, the doctor said, well, you can work 3 days a week. And so I walked down to the hospital, and into the supervisor, administrator, or whatever she was. No, she wasn't an administrator. Head nurse. And I said, can you use some help? I can work Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Oh, of course. I mean, unheard of now. You even get by with that now. So that was very nice. And then I worked. Oh, and then after Jeanne was born, and I would work from 3:30 to 11, or whatever that shift. Loren would go to work early in the morning. He'd be home at 6, but Grandma was across the street, so she'd take care of Jeanne the 3 hours in between, so we didn't have to have a strange babysitter. It was wonderful.
Isn't that the great part about living close to your in-laws?
Right.
Yeah, I have that too. So there was a time you didn't have a car, am I right? And you were working towards getting a car?
Well, no, I think we always had
Oh, did you, or were you getting a new
car.
car? Or
Well,
let's see, I have that wrong.
Let me tell you the car story.
Yeah, well, tell me the car.
Okay, I was down in Fort Knox.
Oh,
I had been transferred up there to a school deal.
this is before I was in Worthington.
Well, and we just got married. Anyway, she called me up. She says, well, she found this little old lady had I think it was a Plymouth coupe. Looked real nice and whatever. And she, I didn't even know she had a driver's license. She didn't drive it much. But anyway, I says, you got a friend to look at it, husband of some of the nurses there. Well, yeah, that one did look at me. That was a good deal. And we bought it, I think it was, what, $500?
Okay, so
$500 in life. Well, and I had never seen it.
500 or 200 miles on it or something.
Anyway, so she's going to come down there at Fort Knox. Okay. Well, here she is.
I have to tell all this.
Well, it's kind of funny. She drove to Mundelein, which is in Chicago, and then she stayed there, and then she came from there on down to Fort Knox. And they didn't have interstates in those days. They had, highways and whatever. And I said, well, how could you keep track of all it? Because her sense of direction is, well, she had it written on the visor, columns. So then, here comes a guy and he says, hey, Sarge, there's some gal out here at the front gate, must see you. So I go out there, and here's this, and it was a nice little car. It was black, and it was well kept and everything. And there she is, and she had on the suit that she got married in. With high heels, and she had a red and white hat that she wore, a little hat, and red and white gloves, and then this kind of a blue skirt. And these guys at the gate were going nuts, And I said, no, it's my wife. So we set up house down there, and I don't know how long
That's
it was.
enough of that.
That tickles me to this day.
While you worked, and how was it? I know what it's like now juggling a family and all that when you've got two people working. Tell me how your days went or how you made it work.
Well, you just, I don't know. He got up in the wintertime, he didn't work much. But in the summertime, of course, he did. So as the kids got older, then we had a girl that would come and take care of the kids during the day. I would work during the day then. And then it was going to become my turn to work nights, which was from midnight or 11:30 till 7:30 in the morning. And I thought, who's going to come and take care of those children from 5:30 when he goes to work until 7:30 when I get home? So then I quit the hospital then and went to the clinic, and that was an 8 to 5 job.
So how long did you work then? Did you work till what year?
Totally,
When did you retire?
I think in I'm trying. Well, I worked at the clinic for almost 20 years, and then I worked at the hospital for the last stint was almost 20 years. And I retired I was 62 because Christine wanted to get her master's, and at that time the only way you could get it was to go to Mankato State all summer long for I don't know how many years it took. And so I said, well, if you want to do that, you do it, and I will retire and take care of the kids while you're gone. And so that was the plan. But then Roger got transferred to Colorado, and they moved to Colorado, and I retired, and I didn't have any kids to take care of.
So tell me what you did then.
Well, then I had some friends that they would go to coffee early in the morning at 8 o'clock, and they all went to work at 9. So they asked me to come down and join them. So that got me up in the morning. And then I'd go walk around the lake or whatever, and then I'd go home and clean or whatever, and I started doing some sewing.
So you volunteered too, I know that. Talk about that, like with hospice and things like that.
Well, I volunteered, yeah, with hospital auxiliary. I worked like in the cafeteria, on several other committees, and at hospice I worked a lot of home visits at the time. I would go and sit with patients to relieve the caregivers so they could go and whatever, get their hair done or grocery shop, whatever they chose. So I did that quite a bit. And I worked out, volunteered out at hospice cottage quite a bit too. And at the nursing home, I would go to the nursing home. And I started doing manicures there for the ladies, and they loved that, so that was fun. That was really fun. And what else did I volunteer at? Well, at church.
Yeah, what did you do?
Meals on Wheels. Did that for,
Mobile meals. Yeah, I remember that. We
She
tied
still-
quilts at
she-
church. And
she's still working at that.
helped on, I wasn't heavily involved, but I did those things.
So you've both been really active in your life. How do you think that's served you in your later years?
Still active.
Yeah, you have to keep going. You can't just stop and sit in a rocking chair. So,
No, we're still active. See, she's busy. Not as much as she was before, but quilts. She doesn't do now, but she makes wall hanging. And she made one for Molly for the wedding on Friday. It was really nice. So no, but then
yeah.
since I've been having these problems, she's kind of taking care of me. That's almost a full-time job right there, really.
Well, we kind of take care of each other, I guess.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? Yeah, that's what
So
it's all
yeah,
about.
I made quilts for each of the grandkids' weddings and each of the great-grandkids' baby quilts for them. And I've made, table runners and things like that. But everybody has a quilt.
Tell me, Lauren's spoken about how you had some hills to climb in your marriage, as everybody does, and on down times. How do you get through it? How did you get through it together?
I think that's the key to it together. Because been married, 71 years?
You just do a lot of praying. And I think if you have respect for each other and love each other, you just roll with the punches. I mean, there you are, you're four, and God's brought you together, and
That's life.
He'll take care of you.